The last promise. The morning sun filtered through the canopy of oak trees in Henderson Park, casting golden rays that danced across the dew-covered grass. It should have been beautiful. It should have been the start of another peaceful day in the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. But for the young German shepherd puppy tied to the massive oak tree near the jogging path, it was the beginning of the longest day of his short life. His name was Scout. At least, that's what the little boy had called him. The boy with the bright blue eyes and the infectious laugh who had promised, just 3 months ago, that they would be best friends forever. Scout remembered that day clearly, the way only a dog can remember the moments that matter most. He had been the smallest in the litter, the one with oversized paws and ears that seemed too big for his head. But the boy had chosen him anyway, scooping him up and pressing his face against Scout's soft puppy fur. "This one," the boy had said with absolute certainty. "This is my dog." Now, as Scout sat on the cold ground with a rough rope binding him to the tree, those words echoed in his mind like a cruel joke. The note pinned to the tree above him fluttered in the morning breeze, its hastily scrawled words explaining what Scout could never understand. "Please be patient, cannot take you with us. We will be out of somewhere showing around help. Sorry if you're inconvenience." The grammar was broken, the sentiment even more so. But Scout couldn't read. All he knew was that the car, the family's blue station wagon that smelled like French fries and wet umbrellas, had driven away 2 hours ago. He had watched it disappear around the bend in the road, his tail wagging hopefully at first, certain they would come back. They always came back, but they hadn't. Scout's world had always been small but complete. There was the backyard with its wooden fence that he was still too small to see over. There was the kitchen where food appeared in his bowl twice a day like magic. There was the boy's bedroom, where he slept curled up on a pile of dirty laundry that smelled wonderfully like his best friend. And there was the boy himself, Tommy, with his sticky hands and his endless energy, who would throw tennis balls until Scout's legs ached with the joy of running. The first sign that something was wrong had come 3 weeks ago. Scout had noticed it the way dogs notice everything, through the subtle shifts in energy, the changes in routine, the way voices rose and fell with unfamiliar urgency. Boxes had appeared in the house, swallowing up the familiar things one by one. The boy's toys disappeared first, then the pictures from the walls, then the comfortable couch where Scout had been allowed to nap in the afternoon sun. Tommy had cried a lot during those weeks. Scout had tried to comfort him, pressing his small body against the boy's legs, licking the salt from his cheeks. Sometimes it helped. Sometimes Tommy would wrap his arms around Scout's neck and whisper, "Don't worry, boy. We're going to be okay. We'll figure something out." But they hadn't figured anything out. The night before, there had been a terrible fight. Scout had hidden under Tommy's bed, his ears pressed flat against his head as the adults yelled. He couldn't understand the words, but he understood the anger, the desperation, the finality. He heard Tommy's mother crying, heard the man, Tommy's father, slam his fist against something hard. And then he heard the words that would seal his fate, though he didn't know it then. "We can't take the dog, Susan. The apartment doesn't allow pets. We've been over this 100 times. But Tommy loves him. It'll break his heart. Tommy's heart is going to have to mend. We're losing the house, Susan. We don't have a choice. A choice." That's what it came down to. And Scout, With his trusting brown eyes and his puppy breath and his unwavering loyalty, was not the choice they made. That morning, Tommy had woken him up before dawn. The boy's eyes were red and swollen, and he moved with the slow, mechanical movements of someone who had cried themselves into exhaustion. He had clipped a leash onto Scout's collar, the blue one with the little bones printed on it, and led him out to the car. Scout had been excited at first. A car ride. Maybe they were going to the park, or to that place with the nice lady who gave out treats and said he was such a good boy. His tail had wagged the whole way, his nose pressed against the window, watching the familiar streets of Millbrook pass by in the gray pre-dawn light. But when they arrived at Henderson Park, something felt wrong. Tommy's hands shook as he tied the rope around the tree. The knot was sloppy. Tommy had never been good at knots, but it held. The boy knelt down in front of Scout, his face crumpling as fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Scout," Tommy whispered, his voice breaking. "I love you so much. You're the best dog in the whole world. I wish things were different." Scout had licked Tommy's face, tasting the salt of his tears, his tail wagging slowly because Tommy was sad and needed comfort. "That's what Scout did. That's what he was for. Someone will find you," Tommy continued, though his voice sounded hollow, like he was trying to convince himself more than the puppy. "Someone nice will find you and give you a good home. Better than we could give you now. You'll see. You'll be happy." Tommy's father had called from the car then, his voice sharp with impatience. "Tommy, now." The boy had stood up quickly, nearly tripping over his own feet. He pressed a note, the one now fluttering above Scout's head, against the tree trunk and secured it with a thumbtack he'd brought from home. Then, without looking back, because looking back would have destroyed him completely, Tommy ran to the car. Scout had barked once, confused. Wasn't Tommy forgetting something? Wasn't he forgetting to untie the rope? But the car door slammed, the engine roared to life, and then they were gone. That had been 2 hours ago. Now, as the sun climbed higher in the sky and the temperature began to rise, Scout tested the rope again. He pulled, gently at first, then with more force. The rough hemp bit into his neck, and he stopped, sitting back down with a small whimper. The rope was about 6 feet long, giving him enough room to move around the base of the tree, but not enough to reach the jogging path where he could see people beginning their morning runs. He barked. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed through the park, desperate and pleading. A woman jogging past looked over, saw the puppy, and slowed. Hope surged in Scout's chest. But then she saw the note, read it quickly, and shook her head before continuing on her way. "Someone else will take care of it," she muttered to herself, adjusting her earbuds. "I don't have time for this today." Scout watched her go, his ears drooping. An hour passed, then another. The sun grew warmer, and Scout began to pant, his small body not yet efficient at regulating temperature. There was no water bowl, no shade except what the tree itself provided. His stomach rumbled. He had been fed the night before, but that felt like a lifetime ago now. More people passed. Some glanced over with pity. Others with annoyance. A few took out their phones and snapped pictures, because tragedy makes for good social media content, but none stopped to help. Modern life had made bystanders of them all, each person assuming someone else would do something, and therefore no one doing anything at all. Scout lay down, resting his chin on his paws. He thought about Tommy. About the way the boy would sneak him scraps of bacon under the breakfast table when his mother wasn't looking. About the way they would wrestle on the living room floor until Tommy's mother told them to take it outside. About the time Tommy had fallen off his bike and scraped his knee, and Scout had licked the wound clean while Tommy laughed through his tears. "You're my best friend," Tommy had said that day. Forever and ever. Forever and ever had lasted exactly 3 months and 4 days. The sound of children's laughter drifted across the park, and Scout's ears perked up. A family was having a picnic near the pond. A mother, a father, and 2 little girls who were chasing each other around a blanket spread on the grass. Scout watched them with an intensity that was almost painful. That could have been his life. That could have been him, playing with children, being part of a family, belonging to someone. But he was here instead, tied to a tree with a note that apologized for the inconvenience of his existence. By noon, Scout was miserable. The sun was directly overhead now, and even the tree's shade provided little relief. His throat was parched, his stomach cramped with hunger. He had stopped barking an hour ago, conserving his energy. He had stopped testing the rope even longer ago, the rough hemp having rubbed his neck raw in places. He dozed fitfully, dreaming of Tommy. In his dreams, the boy came back. He ran across the park, his face bright with joy, and he untied the rope with shaking hands. "I'm sorry, Scout," Dream Tommy said. "We figured it out. You can come home now. You can come home." But then Scout would wake up, and the park would still be empty, and the rope would still be tight around his neck, and Tommy would still be gone. It was early afternoon when she found him. Margaret Chen had been a veterinary nurse for 23 years. She had seen the best and worst of humanity in that time. The people who spent thousands of dollars to save a goldfish, and the people who brought in animals too far gone to be saved, animals who had suffered from neglect so severe it qualified as torture. She had learned to steel herself, to maintain professional distance, because if you let every sad story break your heart, you'd never survive in this profession. But sometimes, despite all her defenses, something broke through. She had been on her way to work, cutting through Henderson Park because the main road was backed up with construction traffic, when she spotted the puppy. At first glance, she thought someone had just tied their dog up while they used the restroom. But as she got closer, she saw the note. She saw the hastily tied knot. She saw the empty water bowl that wasn't there because no one had thought to leave one. And she saw the puppy himself, a beautiful German shepherd, maybe 12 weeks old, with intelligent brown eyes that tracked her movement with desperate hope. "Oh, sweetheart," Margaret breathed, dropping to her knees in front of Scout. "Oh, you poor baby." Scout's tail wagged weakly. A person who had stopped. A person who was kneeling down and reaching out and speaking in the soft, gentle tones that meant safety. Margaret read the note carefully, her jaw tightening with each word. The spelling errors, the poor grammar, these weren't the signs of people who couldn't write. They were the signs of people writing in a hurry. People who couldn't bear to think too carefully about what they were doing because thinking would make it too real. Showing around help, she muttered. "They're not coming back, are they, baby?" Scout licked her hand. Margaret pulled out her phone and called work. "Jessica, it's Margaret. I'm going to be late. I found an abandoned puppy in Henderson Park and I need to get him to the clinic." "Yes, I know we're fully booked. I don't care." Add him to my appointments and I'll stay late. Thank you. She hung up and turned her attention to the knot. Tommy had tied it poorly, which turned out to be a blessing. It came apart in her hands after just a few seconds of work. The moment the rope fell away, Scout jumped up, his tail wagging furiously, his whole body wiggling with relief and joy. That's it, sweet boy, Margaret cooed, running her hands over his body, checking for injuries. You're okay now. You're going to be okay. She scooped him up. He was light, too light for a 12-week-old German Shepherd, which suggested he hadn't been fed properly even before being abandoned, and carried him to her car. Scout settled into her arms like he had always belonged there, his head resting against her shoulder, his small body finally relaxing for the first time in hours. Margaret placed him in the back seat, where Scout immediately curled up and closed his eyes. The exhaustion hit him all at once. The fear, the confusion, the heat, the hunger, the thirst. Within seconds, he was asleep. As Margaret drove to the clinic, she glanced at him in the rearview mirror. She had told herself years ago that she wouldn't get personally involved anymore. She had a full house already, 3 rescue dogs, 2 cats, and a parrot who swore like a sailor. She didn't have room for another animal. But she also couldn't forget the look in Scout's eyes when he first saw her. The desperate hope that warred with learned helplessness. The belief that maybe, just maybe, someone would care enough to stop. At the clinic, Margaret gave Scout a full examination. He was dehydrated and underweight, but otherwise healthy. She started him on fluids, fed him a small meal that he devoured in seconds, and gave him a bath that turned the water gray with dirt. Throughout it all, Scout was patient and gentle, as if he understood that these people were helping him. "What are you going to do with him?" Jessica asked, watching Margaret towel dry the puppy. "Take him to the shelter." Margaret thought about the local shelter. It was overcrowded, underfunded, and operating at 150% capacity. A German Shepherd puppy would get adopted eventually. The breed was popular, but in the meantime, he'd be in a kennel, confused and frightened, wondering why another family had given him up. "No," Margaret heard herself say. "I'm taking him home." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "You said your house was full." "It is. And you said you weren't taking in any more rescues." "I did say that. So." Margaret looked down at Scout, who had fallen asleep wrapped in a towel, his little paws twitching as he dreamed. Whatever he was dreaming about, she hoped it was better than his reality had been that morning. "So I guess I'm a liar," Margaret said with a small smile. That evening, Margaret introduced Scout to his new home. Her other dogs, Max, a grizzled pit bull mix, Luna, a 3-legged beagle, and Pepper, a nervous border collie, sniffed the newcomer with interest. There was the usual posturing, the establishment of hierarchy, but within an hour, Scout was playing tug of war with Max and curling up next to Luna on the couch. Margaret watched them, her heart simultaneously breaking and healing. She thought about Tommy, wherever he was. She wanted to be angry at him, at his family, for what they'd done. And part of her was. But a larger part understood the desperation that led to that moment in the park. The impossible choices that poverty forces people to make. The way love sometimes isn't enough when you're drowning. Still, she hoped Tommy knew, somehow, somewhere, that Scout was okay. That he had been found by someone who understood. That the story hadn't ended with a puppy tied to a tree, slowly giving up hope. She hoped Tommy knew that sometimes, when promises get broken, new ones rise to take their place. Scout adapted to his new life with the resilience that puppies possess. Within a week, he had learned the house rules. Within 2 weeks, he had bonded with his new pack. Within a month, the terror of that day in the park had faded to a distant memory, surfacing only occasionally in dreams that made his paws twitch and his small voice whimper. Margaret kept the note. She wasn't sure why. Some mixture of evidence and reminder. She tucked it into a drawer in her desk, and sometimes, late at night when sleep wouldn't come, she would take it out and read it again. Please be patient. Cannot take you with us. The words still made her angry. But they also made her sad. Sad for Scout, yes, but also sad for Tommy, who had loved a puppy and lost him. Sad for the parents who had been forced to choose between shelter and a pet. Sad for the 1,000 ways that life breaks hearts, both human and canine. 6 months later, Scout was no longer the small, frightened puppy who had been tied to that tree. He had grown into a beautiful young dog, all long legs and oversized ears, with a personality that was equal parts goofy and loyal. He went everywhere with Margaret, to work, to the park, to the grocery store. He slept at the foot of her bed, played with his adopted siblings, and learned commands with an eagerness that suggested he was trying to prove his worth. He never needed to prove anything. From the moment Margaret had knelt down in that park, his worth had been established. He was priceless simply because he existed. One afternoon, Margaret took Scout back to Henderson Park. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps closure, perhaps a reminder of how far they'd both come. They walked along the jogging path, and Scout's tail wagged as he sniffed the autumn leaves. When they reached the old oak tree, Margaret stopped. The tree looked the same. The thumbtack that had held Scout's note was still there, rusted now. She ran her fingers over it, remembering that morning. Remembering the frightened puppy who had taught her that sometimes the biggest hearts live in the smallest bodies. Scout didn't seem to remember. Or if he did, the memory held no power over him anymore. He was too busy being happy, too busy living in a present that was full of love and security. The past was just that, past. You know what? Margaret said, kneeling down and scratching behind Scout's ears. I think we're both pretty lucky. You got a second chance, and I got you. Scout licked her face, his tail wagging so hard his whole back end moved with it. They walked home together as the sun set, casting long shadows across the park. In the distance, Margaret could see other families, other children, other dogs. The world kept turning, full of its joys and its sorrows, its cruelties and its kindnesses. And Scout, who had once been unwanted, who had once been an inconvenience, who had once been tied to a tree with a misspelled note and an empty promise, trotted alongside the woman who had saved him, completely unaware that he had saved her right back. Because that's what rescue stories are really about, not the ending of old promises, but the beginning of new ones. And this time, these promises would be kept.